Hey ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Mr. K's webcast. Today we're going to be talking about ballistic pendulum. So what we see here is that we have some initial velocity on the bullet and we have a pendulum at rest. Those two objects are going to hit each other. They're going to have some initial velocity at such a rate, less than just the bullet itself, that's going to cause the pendulum to rise the given value of h. So what we see essentially is we have kinetic energy initially transferring into gravitational potential energy. So this is a two-part problem. We're going to look at the conservation of energy, and then that's going to help us figure out the velocity of the of the bullet and the pendulum. And then we can look at it as a collision, where we look at just the bullet versus just the bullet and the pendulum. Okay, so there we go. So first of all, the kinetic energy equals the gravitational potential energy. So that's 1/2 mv squared equals mgh. You can see masses on both sides, so those cancel. If we manipulate this formula, it would be 2gh square rooted. So in the question, it tells us that the height is 0.219 meters. So to find the initial velocity, we get that it is 2.07 meters per second. That is the first part of our problem. Now it's a momentum question. So now we think of it as the bullet hitting the pendulum at rest, and then the bullet lodged inside of the pendulum at some velocity less than the original. So it'll look something like this. My momentum of the system initial is going to equal the momentum of the system final. So that's going to be the mass of the bullet times by the initial velocity of the bullet, the mass of the block times by the initial velocity of the block, which is 0 because it's not moving. And then because they're stuck together, it's mb plus mb, or essentially the total mass, times by the new velocity. Don't forget your vector arrow. Okay, and then we organize it, and we know the mass of the bullet from the question was 0.0149 kilograms, times by that initial velocity of the bullet. And then our combined mass is 0.0149 kilograms plus the mass of the pendulum, which is 2.000. And we found the velocity a second ago, so times all that by 2.07 meters per second. Okay, once we manipulate this, we can find that our initial velocity of the bullet is equal to 280 meters per second. Okay, so a ballistic pendulum. It allows us to evaluate or look at projectile motion of something that's very difficult to measure. Like it would be tough to gauge and look at a bullet and say, okay, that's moving 280 meters per second, but it is very easy to measure that change in height. So what we can look at is we look at this GPE and the kinetic energy so that we can figure out this velocity. And then separately, we base this whole thing, look at it as a collision, and then we can determine the velocity of the objects before and the velocity of the objects after. All right, thanks a lot for tuning in, and I will catch you later on.